Hey guys, it's Alex. I'm doing something a little bit different today. I read a couple of books in the past 2 weeks that I didn't really think warranted their own reviews. Not necessarily because they were bad, it's just I didn't have 5 minutes of interesting things or vaguely interesting things to say about them. I mean, some of them I didn't enjoy. But I'm not gonna sit here for 8 minutes and tell y'all that this book you've never heard of, that you weren't planning on reading, is not that good and you probably shouldn't read it. No one wants to hear that. That's pointless. But I wanted to do, I guess a wrap-up, sort of the books I've read recently. I don't know. I'm gonna call it a book talk. That seems better than calling it a wrap-up, because that seems like an end-of-the-month thing, and I didn't feel like waiting till the end of the month. But I read 3 books. The first book I finished, I actually started this after the other one. I needed a break from it because it was long and boring. This is Double Identity by Margaret Peterson Haddix. She writes a lot of younger kids' books. I think middle grade is what these are. They're either older middle grade or young, really young YA. But she's written a bunch of these. I mean, not like a series or something, but this is her genre, and I've read a fair number of them, and I mostly like them. I don't think she's written any that I don't like. They all have kind of kooky plots that are a little bit out there and over the top, but it works because of the genre and what she does with it. It's not meant to be a super realistic thing. This one is about cloning. She has one that's about reverse aging people. They're they usually have a sci-fi kind of bent to them. Soft sci-fi that's not really explored. The main character is 12 in this, and I think that's sort of her audience. Basically, it's double identity. A girl she's 12, about to turn 13, and she gets dumped with her aunt, who she's never heard of, and her parents bail. And she has to figure out what's going on and why things are the way they are, and a little bit predictable, really predictable, but it's intended for 12-year-olds, and it was enjoyable despite being predictable. I gave it 4 stars for what it is. I probably won't reread it. Some of hers I want to reread just because they really stuck out to me, the plots, but this was fairly decent. I mean, 4 stars. I enjoyed reading it. I sat down and read it all in one sitting, and I'd recommend it if you like that sort of younger 12-year-old thing, or if you know someone who's 10 to 12 and they like to read. I'd recommend this book or anything by her, honestly. This isn't her best one. She has some better ones, but I did enjoy this. 4 stars. I recommend it. The second book I read was The Stalking of Kristin. A father investigates the murder of his daughter by George Lardner Jr. This is a non-fiction book. George Lardner Jr. is a newspaper reporter, and his daughter Kristin was murdered in 1992 when she was, I believe, 22, by her abusive ex-boyfriend. And the story is basically... Thank you, dog. This story is basically about that. Stop barking. And about his unpacking of the system and finding out what went wrong and how the system doesn't really support women who have been abused and who are trying to get away from their abusers. And he basically starts at Kristin and Michael. Michael was the man who murdered her. Their childhood, and goes through basically their lives and what happened to them until up to the point of the murder. And then he sort of unpacks the system and how that worked. I mean, some of it he does simultaneously, but basically what happened and what she went through and what a lot of women go through, and it's about that. It's very dry. The last 60 pages were basically statistic after statistic. He'd be, oh, this study done in this year took X part of the population and said Y percentage of them, which was this number, did this, versus this study done in this year by this, and it was just constant onslaught of numbers and dates and facts, and I didn't retain any of it because there was so much. And I don't know, like, he tries really hard to be objective because he's a newspaper reporter. So, like, he tries to give himself that objectivity that he's supposed to. But it's about the murder of his daughter. Like, that's not a subject he can be objective on. And there was this bit at the beginning where he referenced that his wife didn't want him to write this book. She felt it was capitalizing off his daughter's death. That made me uncomfortable. It was really long. Like, unnecessarily so. Like, I felt like this book could have shaved off a solid 100 pages. Just of dry, uninteresting, unhelpful information. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. If it interests you, the information was really good. And I would recommend trying to find his articles, because he wrote articles on the subject, and this book is based on those. And I feel like the articles would be shorter and more succinct, and there would be less overhaul of them. And if you really, like, you might enjoy those more, and if you really enjoy those, maybe then give the book a try. But 2-star read. I was disappointed. I need to stop assuming that nonfiction is going to be creative nonfiction. But I do like regular nonfiction. It's just this book did not do it for me. The third book I read was Killing Mr. Griffin by Lois Duncan. I feel like everyone has read something by Lois Duncan. She wrote a bunch of stuff in, like, I think the 70s and 80s. Like, young adult thriller stuff. Like, the short, quick, vaguely trashy thrillers. Like, I don't mean trashy in, like, a bad way. Just, like, I quite enjoy them. I'm pretty sure I read I Know What You Did Last Summer. I have at least, like, one of her books on my shelf. Or out on the shelves out there. Somewhere, I'm sure. At least one, maybe more. I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. I didn't really like it. They were down. All of them were totally down by about page 20 to kidnap their English teacher for no other reason than he was a kind of hard teacher. And, like, I had hard teachers. And yeah, I hated them. There were teachers I hated that I'd make jokes about wishing them dead. But, like, they all seemed super chill with kidnapping him. And then when he died, most of them were super chill with that too. Like, I didn't understand. By 20 pages in, 3 or 4 of them were just super down with it. And there was a bit where she tried to make it seem like the psychopath of the group manipulated them all into doing it. But, like, he didn't really do much manipulation. And that's not a spoiler. It's really obvious who that is and what's going on. But, like, he really didn't do much manipulation. There was a moment where he was like, yo, we should totally kidnap Mr. Griffin. It'd be fun. And the others were like, yeah, sure. That sounds like a solid plan. Great idea, Mark. And that was pretty much all it took. And it was just, I could not get into that. And all the characters were really annoying. Even the ones you were supposed to kind of like and hope things turned out well for them, they were annoying. And there was, like, one subplot with one of the boys and Mr. Griffin and his father, and, like, she was sort of teasing the idea that Mr. Griffin might be his father. And it never really had an end. It was just sort of left open-ended for you to assume that Mr. Griffin was not, in fact, his father. But it just seemed, like, unnecessary. Like, she was 20 pages short of what was required, and just added that in to fill space. But it never had an end. I mean, I'm assuming Mr. Griffin was not his father, because it never explicitly said either way. But that was teased for a bit, and nothing happened, and I didn't like it. And I gave this 2 stars. She's written better. I'd recommend finding something better, or just not reading it at all. It's not worth it. I've retained very little. In like 3 weeks, I'm probably not going to remember anything about this book, or even having read it. That was my book talk for May. This part of May. I'm not going to do another one. So I guess that was my book talk for May. Because I feel like if I did a wrap-up, I'd have to include the books I've done reviews on, and that just seems like a waste of time. So I'll just add in book talks whenever I read a couple of books that don't get their own review. That was it for today. Bye, guys!